Hello, people of the internet. Today, I want to make a video showcasing one of my all-time favorite things to do. I think of it as my passion, or I guess you could say one of my favorite hobbies, like ever. I love to debate, but not the debate you're probably thinking of, where it's a he said that, she's wrong, he's wrong, she's right, she's wrong, all the time, where the winner is usually the person who speaks the loudest. No, 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 no. I'm not talking about that. Dear people of the internet, I love real debate. The kind where it's as much of a game of strategy and skill, as well as an inquiry into the unknown, where philosophy, ethics, morality, all these things point us into the direction of knowledge, discourse, and truth. Now, I want to spread the word about my favorite format of debate, Lincoln Douglas. Promptly so, this video goes out to people who are new to Lincoln Douglas, interested in LD debate, whether you're a current LDer, a future LDer, or just a person who is curious and happened to end up here. Maybe you are interested in debate in general. Maybe you're bored on a Saturday afternoon and have nothing better to do. Whatever the case may be, this video might teach you some things. It might shed some light on what exactly LD debate is, how it's practiced in current times, and why it's fun, it's useful, and it's ultimately a very engaging extracurricular activity. Now, with all this being said, I want to acknowledge that sadly enough, debate is a horribly elitist activity, one where it discriminates you based on your class and your ability to access quality information. A lot of people can't afford to go to debate camps, private camps held at universities where they discuss the ins and outs, the tips and tricks, the new rules that are going to be for the year per se. I myself couldn't afford it. And I understand that in order to have a more prosperous debate community, the access to information must be equalized. We have to tear down the boundaries of wealth. We have to tear down the elitist architecture that surrounds debate, where your class and where your access to information can determine whether you win or lose a tournament. Granted, there are a lot of, and I mean a lot of talented debaters who don't need to use money to win rounds. And I salute you to that. Props to you. You're living the dream. Unfortunately, for a lot of us new debaters that are just going onto the scene and being essentially thrown into the pack of wolves, don't have access to briefs, to camps, private debate coaching, or even an individual debate class integrated into the school curriculum. This harrowing fact is what inspired me to actually make this lecture and to make this introduction into debate. More specifically, an intro to LD debate. And I want to provide to as many people as I possibly can a free, high quality, and well-designed debate resource that they can use in their rounds, in preparation, and ultimately to become a better debater. The goal of this is simple: provide free information for as many people as possibly can get this forever. This will not be locked behind a paywall. This will never be charged. With that being said, this course will roughly cover the following areas: the history of debate, the substance and format of debate, the components of debate, and in-round organization. Now, let's go back to the history of debate. We're going to cover what the underlying context of what LD debate was, why it's named LD debate, and why the original Lincoln Douglas debates were as impactful as they were. Second, we're going to be talking about the substance and format of the debate. We're going to be discussing what a resolution is, its basic concept, as well as an analysis of a past resolution. We will also be discussing the general format of LD debate. We'll be discussing what the affirmative case is, what the negative case is, how the speeches are distributed, as well as the time order and organization of each speech. Now, as a components parts, in today's lecture, we will be discussing on a very surface level what the affirmative and negative case ought to look like, what their structure is, how it can be implemented, as well as the timing each speech entails. As far as in-round organization, we will barely scratch the surface on how flowing impacts the rounds, as well as why prep time is so essential in debate. We will also be covering an overlook on what the judge's ballot is, what a reason for decision is, and what benefits you get from practicing the advice written in a good judge's ballot. Well, now that we understand this, let's ask the question, what really is LD debate? LD debate is essentially just a one-on-one competitive speaking activity. The factor that does set LD apart, especially from other forms of debate, is that at its core, it's a value debate, meaning that two debaters present competing values under different frameworks. Now, why is this so important? When two ideas are set to compete each other, you must prove with evidence and with logical arguments why that idea should even be considered. This foments and helps you develop critical thinking skills, as well as making you think for yourself and not just believe anything that people say on the news. Fruitful research is always at the core of a good debater. Let's talk a little bit about values. And what does it mean to have a value in the modern world? Well, a value simply means it's a central ideology or a concept that brings meaning to something, someone, or an action. Some examples can include democracy, life, peace. Well, let's take a back step real quick. Why should democracy even be valued? Why is it important? What benefits does a democratic society offer? Well, off the top of my head, a democracy ensures rights. A democracy can ensure freedom of speech. A democracy can ensure your safety. All of these things are valuable and bring meaning to your life. Without it, you can't reach your full potential. So, in essence, we all should value democracy because without it, videos like these wouldn't exist. Let's take a look at life. Why should we even value life? Well, it's pretty self-evident. Life is what allows us to exist. Life is fundamentally a precursor to all other values. Now, that statement can be up to interpretation. It can be up to debate. You could very well argue that life doesn't necessarily have to be valued, and you should prefer instead democracy over life, or vice versa. All of that comes down to the framework debate, and we will certainly dive into what a framework debate is in a future video. Now, let's take a look at peace. Why should peace even be valued? Why is it important? Well, in a world where there's peace, there's no wars, there's less deaths, and people are free to live in harmony. That sounds pretty valuable to me. All of these ideas can compete against each other, and in an ideal debate round, we come to a framework where your value was upheld and is more important than your opponent's value. Now, the beauty of LD debate is that there can be infinite amounts of values. You can value anything. But, like with all other things, there's strong values and there's weaker values. Of course, I will do an in-depth analysis on values and standards in the future video. To kind of bounce back on what standards are essentially how a round should be evaluated. Whether you save the most lives by valuing democracy, or you provide world security by valuing peace, all of that can be up to debate as well. So, if you're still feeling a bit apprehensive on going into debate, let me just give you a quote by a great German philosopher named Friedrich Nietzsche. I'm sorry if I butchered his name. I don't speak fluent German. So, he who cannot put his thoughts on ice should not enter the heat of dispute. Now, I think this quote perfectly exemplifies an incentive to debate. You learn how to think critically, you challenge preconceived notions, you see in reality, well, what does society want you to believe? And should you personally believe that? You learn to put your thoughts on paper, and you learn how to speak them too. If that isn't incentive enough, then I'll guarantee you, during the rest of the video, I'll try to give you another one. Alright, so now that we have all you guys riled up and excited to learn, let's pivot back to our first area of analysis, which is, well, where does LD get its name? What is the underlying context behind the Lincoln-Douglas debates? And is there more to it, to the name? So let's start off with some backstory, alright? Where does LD get its name? LD debate, or Lincoln-Douglas debate, gets its name from the Great Debates of 1858, a series of debates, 7 to be exact, between Abraham Lincoln, the then Republican Party candidate for the United States Senate from Illinois, and the incumbent Senator Stephen Douglas from the Democratic Party. These debates were, in essence, a gigantic game changer, at least for most people. At that time in history, debate was thought of as just two people giving a speech about monotonous topics. But this is what LD changed. This is what the Great Debates did. The Lincoln-Douglas debates turned that perception upside down. In those debates, people got called out, shots were fired, and it really came down to a debate about real things, a debate about actions and policies that impacted everyone. They practically set the peaceful rural Illinois plains on fire. And I mean on fire figuratively, with the heat of competition, with the heat of competitive speaking, if you will. Witty rebuttals and thought-provoking dialogue was, of course, present in the debates, with the central goal of the truth. Now, widespread press coverage turned Lincoln into a national figure. Later on, that national figure would become President of the United States. So, the next time a person asks you, well, what is debate good for? You can answer back with one of your own witty rebuttals. Well, one of the most famous debaters ever actually became President of the United States. How cool is that? So as I was saying earlier, and this image practically puts it best, debate can be a catalyst towards a better future, towards a better tomorrow. And it all starts with you. When you use your voice, not only are you actively engaging in civil discourse, and that brings benefits to literally every party involved, not only because you are expressing that you are capable of forming an opinion, and you are capable of expressing it and convey a central idea to a group of people. This is incredibly valuable to your development as a person. It, of course, boosts your maturity, and it just creates a better society where toleration, where discourse, and where knowledge thrives. So use your voice. Do something, say something, anything. Debate about it. Refuse to debate about it, but speak. Use your gift, because ultimately, every single person benefits from you using it. Now, I'm not advocating for you to just blindly spit out a bunch of words and have a word soup that is incoherent. What I am advocating for is for you to form a intellectually grounded opinion about something that impacts you. Because when you do, you not only become a better communicator, a more insightful person, and you might contribute something to the discussion at the dinner table. Quite honestly, if you ask me, it sounds like a win-win situation for everyone. You learn something, while together we make society a more tolerant and smart institution. Let's pivot back to the history of LD. Now, while the similarities between the Great Debates and LD debate pretty much end here, Abraham Lincoln had the freedom to deliver a 60-minute speech and a 30-minute rebuttal. LD debate is much more concise. The format was reduced to a modest 13 minutes of total speaking time for both the affirmative speaker and the negative speaker. That is not to say that the substance of what we are debating is reduced or belittled. Far from it. The introduction of a time crunch actually allowed for the element of competition to flourish. 13 minutes to deliver a crowd-pleasing, insightful, and elegantly crafted position on a relevant cultural or political dilemma is quite challenging for newcomers. But I assure you, once you decide to embark on this journey, you will find yourself becoming a more engaging and efficient speaker, a superb critical thinker, and a more informed citizen. Now that we briefly discussed the fascinating backstory of Lincoln Douglas debate, let's talk about the actual format. What does it look like in practice, and what does a typical debate round look like, and what does it sound like? So let's take a look at this little chart, adequately titled The Format of LD Debate. Now, in order, the first speech that is delivered is the affirmative constructive, lasting 6 minutes, followed by, and it's not listed here, but it's of note and extremely important part of the round, a 3-minute cross-examination by your opponent. After that, the negative constructive / first rebuttal is delivered, which lasts 7 minutes. After that, the affirmative gives a 3-minute cross-examination on the negative case, followed by the first affirmative rebuttal, which is 4 minutes in length, followed by the second negative rebuttal, which is 6 minutes in length. And to conclude the round, the last speech is the second affirmative rebuttal, which is 3 minutes. The duration of the round is approximately 45 minutes long, and the distribution of the speaking time is as follows: 13 minutes of speaking time for the affirmative, distributed in 3 speeches, 13 minutes of speaking time for the negative, distributed in 2 speeches, and 3 minutes, cross-examination for both sides, and 4 minutes of preparation time throughout the round for both sides. It is of note that the 4 minutes of preparation time, also called prep time, is available between speeches for both debaters to use at their discretion. So whether they want to use all 4 minutes or just 2 minutes is really up to the individual debater, although it is highly recommended to use all 4 minutes of preparation time so that you have the most opportunity to craft the best speech possible. Now that we finished covering our first section in today's video, let's go to our second area of analysis, which is the substance of debate, what we actually are debating. So here we have a little logo of the NSDA, which I will cover in a very short minute. But ideally, the first thing you should cover and get to know and get to be quite familiar with debate, especially when you're starting out, is the resolution. In other words, the substance of the debate, what you exactly are debating. In LD, we debate something called a resolution. It's provided by the NSDA, or the National Speech and Debate Association, and you can see their logo right there. They are the largest forensics organization in the US dedicated to high school speech and debate. They typically put out a new resolution or a new topic bi-monthly or every 2 months. Every debater has 2 months to research and prep their cases, which is by far my favorite aspect of the whole activity. The resolution itself is typically a short 1 to 2 sentences, and normally they encompass current global issues regarding either public policy, morality, culture, among other hip and trendy things, I guess the kiddos would say. The resolution, more often than not, contains the word ought, which signifies a moral imperative, under my interpretation. But of course, interpretations and meanings are all up for debate. People might disagree, people might agree. The fun of debate is that we can come to a consensus inside the round. When we introduce the word ought and we signify a moral imperative, the essence of the debate is now a question of morality. The key thing about resolutions is that they are always kept open-ended, so the debater can affirm or negate it. Before we go any further, let's take a step back and ask ourselves, what does affirm and negate even mean in this context? Now, we should not be intimidated or even worry about the connotations these words have at this moment. Affirming the resolution essentially means that your position is one of support of the resolution, and why it's a good thing. Negating the resolution just means that your position is that the resolution is bad and it should be negated. Now, the really, really, really fun part of the debate is that you get to experience arguing both sides. You never get locked down or constrained to just one viewpoint. You spice things up, I guess you could say, and you make sure that the round and that the debate space doesn't become stale. I personally, and this is just me, I like the duality. I like this format because it makes you think outside of the box. It makes you actually look at the big picture. It doesn't narrow your scope to just look for arguments that could benefit the affirmative side or the negative side. You should be trained to look for arguments that could knock down your affirmative side if you were to hit it while you were a negative. It's certainly a very useful skill to have, especially in the real world, that not only understanding that your perspective isn't the only one and that you don't live inside a bubble might help you in life and might help you outside of the debate space. Now that we know what the resolution is, let's go over a resolution and dissect it. Let's see what a typical resolution looks like, and let's talk about what implications or arguments could spur. Now, in this example, we're going to be taking a look at the 2020 March-April novice topic. Resolved, civil disobedience in a democracy is morally justified. First things first, there's a lot of things to unpack here. The first thing you could have noticed, or well, you should have noticed, is that this specific resolution is a question about morality. Is it right or wrong to engage in civil disobedience? This takes the debate into territory where the practicality or popularity of civil disobedience is largely irrelevant. We now have a centralized and, I guess you could say, a niche of literature that we can examine. We can actually look at moral theories. We can look at, well, is morality intrinsic in democracy, or is civil disobedience inherently moral or amoral? We could definitely look at those types of arguments, and in our research stage, we most definitely should be looking at those type of literature. Now, this topic is really interesting because what matters is fundamentally the question of, is civil disobedience right or wrong? Is it morally okay? Is it morally not okay? A possible affirmative argument you could encounter, or well, you probably will encounter, is, okay, let's go through it. Let's think about it. I'm an affirmative. And my mindset is that, well, I live in a democracy. I have a right to freedom of expression. I have a right to protest peacefully. So that means that my rights of protesting can also extend to civil disobedience. Therefore, I have a right to have civil disobedience inside democracy. And after all, a functioning democracy guarantees me the right to my expression, it guarantees me the right to my opinion, and it guarantees me the right to protest in a nonviolent way. And now that I'm thinking of all these things, I can come to the conclusion that if you were to negate the resolution, you would be limiting my right of expression, you would be limiting my right of speech, and you would be limiting my right of protest. And that's morally wrong. Now, that's a pretty interesting argument. In my opinion, and this is just me, the true beauty of debate actually lies not in the competitive aspect of it, not in the research and preparation, but it lies in the infinite amount of affirmative and negative arguments for any given resolution, any given topic, and any given field of debate. There's an infinite amount of affirmative and negative responses. To me, that just boggles my mind. Now, let's go back to the topic. Let's focus back to the March and April resolution. Let's take a look at a possible negative argument. So let's say I want to negate this resolution. I am now a negative. Some of my arguments could include that civil disobedience can be misused. It can be misused in a derogatory way. It can target minority groups. It can target ethnic groups. You could even say that civil disobedience is a stepping stone for violent public revolt. These arguments essentially say that the effects of implementing the resolution infringe on my rights of safety and ultimately hinder the government's ability to protect me. And that's morally wrong. Both can be compelling arguments, but it's up to you to decide your own case. It's up to you to decide what arguments you like, what arguments you don't like, and how your general case structure would look like. After all, there are no wrong arguments in debate. There are, however, strong and weak arguments. With time, practice, and a good amount of preparation, you will be able to determine what a strong argument looks like and what a weak argument looks like, and you will be able to know exactly how to respond to a strong and a weak argument. Remember, after all, your case is yours, and you are free to put as much or as little flair as you wish. Now that we covered the first two areas of analysis, we will be moving on to our third area of analysis, which is the discussion surrounding components of debate and the actual negative and affirmative speeches, what they typically look like, and how they should be used in a round. So, let's walk through the round. Debate is very much an organic and evolving activity, but it does have a set-in-stone format. A clear example of how this dynamic is shown is in the way people now present their actual debate cases. Back in the day, people were 100% paper reliant, flowing and reading their cases off of paper, jotting down notes with pens and pencils. A tried and true method, which, in my opinion, is best for people who are starting out in this activity. However, today, more than ever, people are starting to go paperless, opting to use their computers to both read their cases, flow the round, and jot down notes, and what people call a speech document. This method allows for a more universal and centralized approach. It does, however, have a strong learning curve, especially for those who have been accustomed to traditional paper-on-paper debate. Thus, this method is recommended for more advanced LDers. Now, let's go back to that initial sentence. Debate is very much an organic, evolving activity with a set-in-stone format. As we saw in this example, people now debate differently. People previously debated paper on paper, writing down the good old-fashioned way of pen on pencil. Now, people are going computer to typing, and it's evolved exponentially. And people are now using their computer and going paperless more and more, especially because of the ease of access. Now, debate, I guess you could say, evolved, but it stayed with its set-in-stone format. People are still giving their same debate cases, the same tried and true methods of framework, contention debate, and then voting on voting issues such as value, framework, and scope and scale of arguments. That's an example of how debate, with time, adapts to the debaters. But one thing that is of note is that debate itself adapts very slowly. Now, a lot of debate circuits still are 100% paper reliant, and some other debate circuits are more and more computer reliant. So there are cases where there is a bit of a culture shock when a debater that comes from maybe a smaller, more traditional circuit that has his or her case on paper instead of a flash drive or a tablet. What does, however, stay constant in debate and will always be universal in a sense is the affirmative and negative cases. But before we go and discuss them more in depth, let's have an analysis on elements that should be included during case research. Before we can talk about cases, we need to talk about how to construct them. We need to talk about how we should actually research and support our cases. The first thing that we should do is do actual research. Yes, I know, a simple Google search sometimes isn't enough. A good starting resource is Google Scholar, and it's very easily available. It's actually incredibly accessible. All we have to do is just type up Google Scholar and it takes us to a new search engine. Now, if you do become a member of the NSDA, you will have access to a database called Hines Online, where it has a lot of really fascinating and valuable information regarding case law. And that's an incredibly important resource when it comes down to arguing about policy, arguing about past policies, and arguing about whether that policy was effective or not. Now, more advanced users could, in theory, use more advanced databases. Some really good LDers actually look at some law schools' law journals and get some articles and use those for arguments and use them as maybe case studies or cards. Now, when we talk about the analysis of the evidence, a key thing we have to keep in mind is, well, is the evidence worth anything? Is the evidence from a reputable source? We can ask questions about, well, who wrote the evidence? Was it peer reviewed? Was it fact checked? Is it relevant to our current discussion? How recent is the publication? Sometimes now is an important thing we have to keep in mind. Is it important or even relevant to discuss, say, for example, Cold War policies in the current era? Now, all of that is something we have to keep in mind when we do our actual research. Now, when we look at data study, it's critical to look at the article and analyze, what does it actually say? Is it supporting your argument? Is it just tanking your argument? Either way, if you find that that article has in some way some value to your position or can even discredit your position, I would keep it, because it may not be useful to that specific argument you're trying to construct on affirmative or negative, but it might be useful to another argument you might be constructing on another affirmative or negative, or it might even be useful to one of your team members or another person in your debate squad, or it might just be even be an interesting read. Another thing that is super important is the element of comparison. Communication and collaboration is what makes or breaks a good debate squad. You have to talk to your debate coach. You gotta talk to your peers. Compare and contrast your research, and most importantly, and the key attribute that is essential in debate is that you win rounds by learning. And you'd be surprised how far learning can take you. If you have fun with it, and if you actually like what you're talking about, then honestly, you will win a lot of rounds. Without further ado, let's talk about the affirmative and negative cases. Now, it should be noted that there is 4 minutes of preparation time that is given to each debater to use between speeches at their discretion. Without further ado, the affirmative case. Now, of course, there will be a future video solely dedicated to the affirmative case and how to best construct one for a given resolution. I will also provide a sample case and a step-by-step explanation on how all the pieces work together. Now, the affirmative speaker gets to speak 3 times. The affirmative constructive, or otherwise known as the 1AC, the first affirmative rebuttal, the 1AR, the second affirmative rebuttal / closing speech, the 2AR. The first speech, or the affirmative constructive, is 6 minutes in length. This speech is your time to shine, where you present your case, and more specifically, you introduce your framework. What is that? Your framework is essentially your value, the central idea that your case is holding up, your standard, how the debate round should be weighted, your arguments or contention, the essence of what you are arguing. Basically, key points that are either advantages in affirming the resolution or disadvantages in negating the resolution. Most, if not all of the evidence that will be used in round will be outlined in this speech, in the form of contentions. Contentions are central arguments that support your framework. Now, the second speech for the affirmative is the first affirmative rebuttal, the 1AR. This speech is 4 minutes in length and is a crucial step in debate, especially for the affirmative. This speech is primarily used to elaborate further your arguments, otherwise known as extending. You also have a chance to respond to the attacks made on your case by your opponent. Responding is the most challenging part of the round, in my opinion. If you were to not respond to an argument made by your opponent, let's say, during your first rebuttal, you will be unable to respond to it in your second rebuttal. What this essentially means is that if you don't say it in your first rebuttal, you won't be able to say it again in your second rebuttal. And that concept applies to your opponent as well. Let me give you an example. Let's say I have argument A, right? And I have argument B. Now I give my rebuttal. I forgot to say and talk about argument B. I can no longer talk about argument B in my second rebuttal. I can only talk about argument A. Now, that can also work to your advantage. If I'm your opponent and you have argument A and B, and I don't say anything about argument A, and you say and further elaborate about argument A in your rebuttal, I can't attack argument A anymore because I never addressed it. This is basically the concept of dropping. Whether if you forget to respond or mention an argument, it is dropped and is unable to be used in the round. Your first rebuttal is essentially how you're going to make the round. Your first rebuttal can either make or break you. It's really hard to win a round if you mess up your first rebuttal. You're going to have to shine and give it 150% in your second rebuttal. And pray to your lucky stars that your opponent also has a bad rebuttal. Well, now let's go on to the final speech of the affirmative debater. It's the second rebuttal / closing speech, otherwise known as the 2AR. This speech is shorter than your first rebuttal, being only 3 minutes in length. It's where you essentially win the round. After addressing your attacks your opponent has undoubtedly delivered throughout the round, you are given a final opportunity to elaborate on your case and extend your framework along with the rest of your arguments. Now, it's super important to extend as many things as you possibly can, or if you prefer, extend only the things that have strategic value. Say, for example, always go to the argument that you know you are winning. You're 100% undoubtedly winning this point, and blow it up. Make it the issue in today's debate, because if the issue that is most prevalent in the debate is the issue that you're winning, odds are you're probably going to win the round. Also, the final 30 seconds of your speech, you deliver voters, which essentially means the reason why the affirmative side should win the round, listing issues that were prevalent in the round. Say, for example, a voting issue would be framework. Your opponent dropped your value, which means that you win the framework debate because they essentially concede that your value is superior. Or let's say the contentions debate, whether you have a strong list of arguments that your opponent didn't touch or that didn't attack well enough, then that could also be a voting issue. Voting issues and voters are also what can win you rounds. If you can effectively show to the judge that your speech or that your side of the round was in fact superior towards your opponent's handling of the debate, then you probably will win the round. Another thing that is a huge tip, and most affirmatives don't utilize it, and much to their dismay, but I'm going to tell you to utilize it. It's one of the unique advantages the affirmative has. So, the affirmative side always speaks first and last. This provides you with the unique opportunity to take control of the room. A good affirmative speaker will establish the ethos of the round and will use it to their advantage, showing the judge and their opponent that they know what they're talking about. Before we go any further, I'd like to discuss a common place of contention between new LDers, and that is the common misconception that you're unable to introduce new evidence into the round. This notion is simply untrue. You can always bring up new evidence into the round so long as it supports a previously established argument laid out in the constructive speeches. However, you are unable to introduce new arguments after the constructive speeches. You are also not allowed to elaborate arguments that were left out of the rebuttal. The rebuttals, in essence, are what win you the rounds. That is why I believe the best debaters should have a rough idea of how most rounds will look like, and they should be ready for anything. Now, let's talk about the negative case. There will be a future video solely dedicated towards the negative case, how to best construct it, per resolution of course, and I'll also provide a sample case with a step-by-step explanation on how all the pieces work together. The negative side, just like the affirmative side, is filled with its own little quirks and possible advantages, of course, if used correctly. The negative side is largely reactionary towards the affirmative side. On the negative side, you get to deliver two speeches. The first negative constructive / rebuttal, otherwise known as the 1NC / 1NR, which is 7 minutes long, and the second negative rebuttal, the 2NR, which is 6 minutes long. As you can see, you speak twice, but for much longer. This time, the time difference can be a double-edged sword. Time management and strategic thinking is essential when you negate a resolution. A good negative speaker will deliver their constructive speech in 4 minutes and rebut the affirmative speech with the remaining 3 minutes. Of course, as with any constructive, they must construct their framework, they must introduce their contentions, and they must display their arguments. In the negative world, and more specifically, the negative side of debates, the quality of your arguments is imperative. It must come before the quantity of your arguments. Due to the limited time available in your constructive, it's very important to deliver strong and cohesive arguments that you can easily remember. It's important to focus as much time as possible on rebutting your opponent's points so you avoid drops during the round. Especially on the negative side, drops are your worst enemy if you are the one who commits the drops. The second and final speech that the negative will deliver is the second negative rebuttal, otherwise known as the 2NR. This speech is what will win you the round. You must focus extremely on this speech. You have to extend all the arguments available and rebut your opponent's points. The best case scenario in addressing your opponent's main arguments is about 2 to 3 minutes, and extending your own case for 3 minutes. If time allows, always finish off with the last 30 seconds with voters. Keep an eye on the flow. Keep track of drops. They can help or they can hurt you. Ultimately, the negative is pretty straightforward. You gotta keep an eye out for drops, and you gotta manage your time extremely well. Keep an eye out for a future video where I explain how to fully utilize the full power of the negative and its unique powers, i.e. counterplans and critiques, elements of more progressive style of debate. With all that being said, we can now talk about our final area of analysis in today's video, the logistics of debate. So, what exactly does it entail? And how does in-round organization look like? So, the first thing we want to address is flowing, or, in other words, keeping track of the round. In order to devise a coherent and persuasive speech, you must keep track of the round. What you are saying and what your opponent is saying should be jotted down on a piece of paper or digitally. To do this, you must flow around, keeping track of what is said and what is argued. Now, I don't mean a word-by-word transcript of what you said and what your opponent said. That's impossible. But I do mean a record of the essential points and arguments that you said, as well as what arguments your opponent presented. A perfect flow is essentially a flow where you can reconstruct the round after it has taken place, so you can practice what worked and what didn't. Flows are essential to debate. Now, you can flow either on pieces of paper or digitally. A more in-depth video concerning flowing will be made where I explain how I flow my rounds, both digitally and on paper. Again, if you are just starting out in debate, I highly recommend you flow on paper. It's a lot easier and a lot quicker to pick up on. The final thing we're going to be taking a look at in today's video is the judge's ballot, or sometimes known as the reason for decision. The debate is done. You performed your best. You gave it your all. Honestly, I congratulate you. It's not a simple feat. At the end of the round, your debate coach should receive the judge's ballot with a decision of either a win or a loss. Now, another extremely important thing that I want you to take away is that both a win and a loss are a learning experience. A learning experience that is invaluable in debate. The ballot should indicate the speaker points, or how well you spoke during the round, and some critiques, some advice, commentary, or recommendations on your performance, as well as a reason on why they decided to affirm or negate. This feedback is super important. If you decide to take the advice, you become better. It's simple as that. Now granted, I'm assuming that the advice is good to begin with. We always want to have constructive criticism, never ever bashing on people. Now, as with all things, ballots and judges can be subject to bias. If you encounter a bad judge or a bad ballot, don't worry. Just turn the other cheek, and better ones will come. I can guarantee you, there will be many, many more debate rounds. You've watched the whole video, and now have a basic understanding of what LD is. I'm very proud of you. I'm very excited for you. When you decide to debate, you open up so many doors you never even knew existed. I really look forward to producing more videos with more detailed analysis of each component of LD. I also plan on making standalone videos where more advanced topics and fields are discussed. You can expect a wide variety of topics, including analysis of both traditional and progressive debate archetypes, philosophy, sociology, critical theory, games theory, as well as trends and new argument types present inside the community, as well as many more, all concerning about debate and how they relate to it. Thank you so much for watching this video, and have yourself a good one.